Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We are on the air, Soccer Morning, backheel.com. Hi, how are you? How's it going? What's happening? Weekend's coming. I think you're probably good to go. I know I am. I am good for the weekend. I'm ready. I have been fried this week. Lots happening. We've had some good shows here at Soccer Morning, but then you've had some heavy weights placed upon us, both as a soccer community and culturally in general. So here we go. Let's start a big show for you first, because we were not on the air yesterday. Let's go ahead and in this space note the passing of Dutch great Johan Cruyff at the age of 68. If you do have SiriusXM, if you have a subscription, I highly recommend going back and listening to some of the broadcasting from SiriusXM FC yesterday, including Soccer Morning. I thought it was a very good tribute to an incredibly influential man in the world of football for those people who are in my age range or even younger who did not get to see Johan Cruyff play. A wealth of resources on that channel. Rodney Marsh, Ray Hudson. We had Shep Messing on Soccer Morning. More after the fact, Thomas Rongen made an appearance on Counterattack from his day, talking about his days playing with Johan Cruyff. So go listen to all of that if you want to learn about Johan Cruyff. Today's program will be thematically all about CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. Our two guests are Seth Vertelny from Goal.com. We'll touch on World Cup qualifying for the United States of America, also on the U23, so Olympic qualifying tossed in there when it comes to Seth. And then Dwayne Rollins, 24th Minute Canadian Soccer News, will join us. We'll go through the Canadian Challenge tonight against Mexico in Vancouver with Mr. Rollins. So, with that in mind, those two guests coming in limited time, let's hit the news. Actual, verifiable news out of Miami, Florida. David Beckham's Miami Beckham United Group has acquired privately owned parcels of that site in Miami's Overtown neighborhood. That is the proposed location for their MLS stadiums. The first time Beckham's group has obtained land towards the building of a stadium. There have been many different plans that have come to nothing. This is the first time the group has actually managed to get some land towards this stadium. The group must now begin the process of obtaining permission to buy the government-owned land on the lot, as well as getting the zoning necessarily to build it. So, one hurdle cleared, bigger hurdles to come, governmental hurdles, red tape hurdles. Are we supposed to be overly enthused at this point? It's an interesting question as to whether or not this represents real progress or if it is a false dawn down in Miami. CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying. There was a host of games last night. Hopefully you partook. Is that a word? You can partook. Hopefully you watched some of those games. Argentina 2-1 winners over Chile in Chile. Ecuador gets a 90th minute equalizer from Angel Mena to remain unbeaten in qualifying with a 2-2 draw against Paraguay. Paraguay should have seen that game out, but Ecuador certainly deserved to come back and get a draw. Colombia wins 3-2 over Bolivia. Peru, a 2-2 draw against bottom feeders Venezuela. Ecuador remains atop of the table after 5 matches played. Meanwhile, Brazil hosts Uruguay tonight to complete the round. After that match, everyone will be on 5 games played in CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying, which we know from experience is quite the gauntlet for these sides. I'm just going to check here on the standings, which I had pulled up and then somehow lost. So let's go ahead and look at the table very quickly. If I can find it. It disappeared on me. It doesn't want to work. All right. Well, we'll come back to that, I suppose. Let's go to news out of for the U.S. men's national team. Aaron Johansson, Werder Bremen striker, will miss the rest of the Bundesliga season after Werder Bremen announced he has not recovered from hip and groin injuries that have limited to just 6 appearances this season. He scored twice for Bremen. Of course, he moved over from AZ Alkmaar, a big move for Aaron Johansson, yet he has not been able to make any sort of difference at Werder Bremen yet. This obviously means that he won't be able to play for the United States of America as long as he is recovering either. We'll see what this means for the Copa America tournament coming up this summer and whether or not he will be available to Jurgen Klinsmann, who needs as many options as possible, especially at that striker position. United States U23s are in Barranquilla for the first leg of a playoff tie with Colombia for the right to go to the 2016 Olympics in Brazil. The first of the two legs kicks off at 5 p.m. Eastern today on Fox Sports 1. Make sure you recognize the time. It's an early kickoff for American viewers, 2 p.m. on the West Coast. Coach Andy Herzog will look to return home with a manageable scoreline. Second leg set for Frisco, Texas, next Tuesday night. Have not seen ticket sales on next Tuesday. These games typically don't do real well, and it's midweek. We'll see. Hopefully the fans down there in Texas show up to support the boys, and hopefully they come back from Colombia with something that they can handle, a manageable scoreline. There's some talent in that team, and yet it is obviously a massive challenge for the United States. I was looking at a proposed lineup from someone at Soccer by Ivis. I'm not sure who that actually was, who put together the lineup, but it did not have Emerson Hyman in it. Instead, it had Fatai Alashi in the middle of the field. I believe Will Trapp alongside him. That's beside the back line. Matt Miazga, I think, is a guaranteed starter. Tim Parker's there. You've got to have players in front of those guys to shield the back line. Kellen Acosta is probably going to play in the back line because there's limited options at fullback. You have Eric Miller in this group as well. And then the attackers. I mean, are you going to get a lot out of this foursome? Probably Jordan Morris and Jerome Kiesewetter on some combination up top. Beyond that, it's a matter of choice for Herzog as he looks to probably come back with something approaching a 0-0 if he can get it. The U.S. men's national team, the senior squad, faces Guatemala in Guatemala City tonight as World Cup qualifying resumes in the CONCACAF region. That game is at 10 p.m. on BN Sport or NBC Universo if you have that and want to watch en Espanol. So, CONCACAF qualifying elsewhere. St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Trinidad and Tobago going off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern today. That's a game that obviously is in the same group as the United States. You have Haiti and Panama in Group B. Jamaica hosting Costa Rica, also in Group B. El Salvador and Honduras in Group A. Canada and Mexico in Group A as well. Again, Dwayne Rollins, 24th Minute Canadian Soccer News, will join us to talk about that challenge for the Canadians and where the Canadian program is right now. I'm looking elsewhere around the world. You have African Nations Cup qualifying, including Nigeria and Egypt, which sounds like a very tasty one. That game's at 11 a.m. Eastern, so right as we start on Soccer Morning over on Sirius XM. You don't really have much else happening. There's a bunch of friendlies in Europe, if you're interested in that kind of thing. Netherlands and France is a notable one, 3:45 p.m. Eastern, in part because there's a planned pause of that game for the passing of Johan Cruyff, who was obviously so immense in the world of Dutch football. 14 minutes, they will have a minute-long silence in tribute to Johan Cruyff. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, it is time to talk World Cup qualifying. Seth Vertelny of Goal.com will give us some sense of what the United States might be doing tonight against Guatemala, and also a check on the U23s. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on a Friday edition of Soccer Morning. We are just hours, well, I guess 11 hours, less than 11 hours away from the United States taking on Guatemala in World Cup qualifying in Guatemala City. And to talk about that and also touch on the U23s as they face off against Colombia, Seth Vertelny from Goal.com. Hey, Seth.
Hey, Jason, how's it going?
Hey, it's going okay. How do you think it's going for Jurgen Klinsmann right now, ahead of what is supposed to be a pretty manageable 2-game set against Guatemala?
Well, it could be a little better. He could have one of his 2 starting goalkeepers in better form or playing when it comes to Tim Howard. He could have one of his best players not injured in Fabian Johnson. Seems pretty unlikely that he'll play, but all things considered, he's got a pretty strong roster, and I think that they should manage a good result tonight in Guatemala.
Well, they haven't lost to Guatemala in 21 games, but I think there is a reason. There's at least some argument to be a little negative about their chances tonight. If they lost 1-0, no one would be that surprised, would they?
I would be pretty surprised. I mean, this is not an especially strong Guatemala team.
Okay, fair enough.
They haven't lost to them in a very long time. They usually manage to at least get draws. I don't think they win too much in Guatemala. But anything can happen in CONCACAF qualifying on the road. But I mean, this Guatemala team, they lost their first game in this round of qualifying at home to Trinidad and Tobago. So if they couldn't get a point at home against Trinidad and Tobago, I would be pretty surprised to see the U.S. fail to at least get a draw. But I wouldn't be surprised if they couldn't win this game.
So the United States, okay, so right now where we are sort of with this program is, coming into 2016, it was an opportunity to clear the slate. 2015 was particularly bad, or at least it was well below typical American standards. What have you seen? I mean, is there something specific we can point to and say, okay, that's what Klinsmann's trying to do? I'm not saying it's successful. I'm not making a judgment yet. It's still March. These are, again, CONCACAF qualifiers ahead of the Hex. The Hex is when it gets really tough. But are we seeing a new approach or a different approach or even an attempt to kind of grab things by Klinsmann?
Well, I think it's interesting because tonight he has a chance to try to implement more of the proactive style that he talks about a lot, but we haven't seen. And I think the way that he lines up tonight will say a lot about the way that he is approaching the beginning of this year, because you have 2 guys on the roster in Darlington Nagbe and Lee Nguyen who are more in line with what Klinsmann has promised and has said that the U.S. is going to try to play in a proactive possession, more attacking style. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he starts one of those 2 guys tonight in more of a advanced center midfield role and have Michael Bradley a little bit more withdrawn like he's been playing with Toronto FC. I think, like I said, Guatemala, it's a team that you need to respect, and it's a team that you can't expect to just go on the road and dominate. But it's not Honduras, it's not Mexico, it's not Panama. It's a team that you can reasonably expect to go away and still control most of the game. And I think if you see the U.S. start a little bit more of a attacking lineup with a win or with a Nagbe, that could be a signal that they're trying to move forward a little bit with this proactive playing style and taking the game to their opponent.
If you had to guess, if you had to put a percentage possibility on Klinsmann actually doing that, going with a proactive lineup in Guatemala, what percentage would you put on it? I mean, it makes what you're saying makes a lot of sense, Seth, and yet I've been proven stupid by Jurgen Klinsmann's moves in the past.
Yeah, I've gotten out of the business of predicting Cleveland's lineups, but I still think that he's going to start Bradley and Beckerman in the middle. It just seems more in line with what he's done in the past, and because they're away, he's going to probably try to play a little bit more conservative and go for a tie or a 1-goal win.
Well, okay. Well, in order to get a win, they need a goal. I'm not saying he's definitely going to set up with an attempt to go at goal that much. We'll see. I mean, there's going to be some attacking talent on the field. Imagine Clint Dempsey's in this lineup, but how does that combination work up top? Because my understanding, and I think a lot of people will be very surprised to see Josie Altidore start, considering he's still working his way back to full fitness after the hamstring injury.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He hasn't really gotten a lot of minutes this year, and you have a ready-made replacement there in Bobby Wood, who's been in really good form for Union Berlin in the German second division. So, yeah, if I had to guess, I would say you're going to see Dempsey and Wood start up top. It's a combination that we haven't really seen too much of. We saw a little bit in the CONCACAF Cup against Mexico. But certainly there's enough attacking talent there to score goals away against Guatemala. I just want to see how Dempsey and Wood combine together, and if it is Bradley playing a more advanced midfield role, is he going to be able to create enough, or are you going to see a lot of the attack come more from the flanks, whether it's Zardes or Bedoya or Yedlin, maybe trying to create offense that way and get crossed.
Okay, the name you didn't mention is Nagbe, but if Nagbe's on the field, he's probably playing wide, right?
Yeah, or if it's more of a 4-2-3-1 setup, you could see him kind of in a midfield triangle. But Klinsmann's played Nagbe wide more often than not during his time with the national team.
All right, okay. So let's shift to the back line. I mean, this is a team. Klinsmann has proven a proclivity to want his fullbacks to be involved. I mean, certainly, we've seen in the past an attempt at least to make combination play work up the flanks, and here we go with a roster that has 9 defenders, 7 of whom are center backs, and the 2 that are fullbacks aren't necessarily the guys you're going to want bombing forward.
Yeah, definitely. 26 people on this roster, and like you said, 2 outside backs. It's kind of questionable. He stacked the roster with tons and tons of center backs, and just seems a little out of balance to the point where, with this injury to Fabian Johnson, there's only one left back on the roster, and that's Edgar Castillo, who hasn't played with the national team in 2 years. So it's a little strange, and, I saw Klinsmann was asked about this yesterday, and he said that they'd be comfortable playing Ventura Alvarado or Michael Orozco at left back should something happen to Castillo, and I don't think anybody else that follows the national team
I'm over here doing the shrugging guy, Seth, because come on, really, that's what we're doing now. We're talking about Ventura Alvarado playing wide. It's so Klinsmann that I can't be shocked by it, and yet I scratch my head and I don't understand.
Well, it's especially frustrating because you have a guy in Jorge Villafana. Not only is a left back playing well in Liga MX, a league that Klinsmann clearly rates because he calls guys up like Alvarado and Orozco who aren't even playing for their teams, but he's also a dual national who is eligible for the U.S. and Mexico, and basically said he's waiting for whichever nation to call him first he's probably going to go with. So it's a little strange. But, yeah, for tonight, I'd be interested to see whether Klinsmann is going to start Yedlin at right back, and then, that would signal more of an attacking look. Or he could go with Michael Roscoe, who he started at right back in previous games, and that would signify more of a defensive approach.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, So we're looking at a situation where typically, and like you said, it's not always true that the United States goes to Guatemala, bosses the game, comes back with 3 points. Central American qualifying. I know sometimes people think that it's a cop-out, is an excuse for poor performance, but there is a history here of it being mildly difficult. If you're supposed to beat Guatemala City in a neutral venue, or Guatemala in a neutral venue, then when you're in Guatemala City, you're going to probably have a little bit more of a difficult time. It's going to be rowdy. It's going to be wild. Projectiles may be involved. So we sort of get it. And yet what we're talking about is, at least in those situations, typically, the United States tries to go for it. They may find themselves in a dogfight. They may get a draw, but they're going for it. We're not sure Klinsmann's going to go for it, is what we're saying.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that the midfield's going to say a lot. Whether he starts Beckerman or puts Bradley a little farther back and starts a guy like Wynn. I think the back line's going to say a lot, whether he starts Yedlin or whether he starts Orozco. But if I had to predict, I would expect more of a defensive setup, kind of grind it out, kind of a game like you saw in Guatemala 4 years ago at this stage, where the U.S. got an early goal. They were ahead 1-0 for most of the game. And then Marco Papa scored a free kick late on for a 1-1 tie. Which wouldn't be a terrible result for the U.S. as long as they win the return leg in Columbus on Tuesday. They'll be in okay shape. But I do think that with the way it went 4 years ago at this stage of qualifying, how the U.S. had to wait until the last game in Antigua and Barbuda. They got a goal from Eddie Johnson from an assist from Alan Gordon and kind of saved their bacon, so to speak. I think they would really like to make it a little more comfortable this time around and maybe even have clinched a spot in the Hex before the final 2 games of this group phase.
Seth, one of the things that has been interesting coming into this round of games is the fact that it does coincide with the U23s and their playoff tie against Colombia. We're going to get to that actual challenge here in a minute. They play this afternoon. But the question was whether or not Jurgen Klinsmann was going to call in certain players, namely John Brooks, DeAndre Yedlin, to the senior squad, and maybe we can get to Christian Pulisic in a minute, but the senior squad rather than the U23 squad. I was arguing before this roster came down that it made more sense to give Andy Herzog as much talent as possible, considering he's got the tougher challenge. Klinsmann didn't go that way.
No, he didn't, and I kind of agree with you on that. When you look at a guy like John Brooks, he's clearly in really good form for Hertha Berlin in the Bundesliga right now, and he's somebody who can contribute to the senior national team. However, you have a combination in Jeff Cameron and Matt Beasler at center back that has proven to be pretty effective and has proven to be the U.S.'s best center back combination over the last year. And with that in mind, and like you said, with the challenge the U.S. faces at Colombia, it would seem to make more sense to send a guy like Brooks down with the U23s and try to get a good result in Colombia. Now there's this interesting wrinkle with the rosters where after the U.S. plays at Guatemala and after the U23s play at Colombia, you can actually swap players between the two U.S. rosters. The only thing that I would be concerned about is after the first leg in Colombia, the U.S. could be facing a pretty big deficit to the point where swapping players between the rosters might not do anything. It might be too late for that. So I think for that reason, a guy like Brooks, maybe even a guy like Yedlin, might have been better served with the U23.
Well, there is the wrinkle. Another wrinkle that I'm 99% sure of this fact is that clubs do not have to release players for youth international teams. So if you say, it seems like semantics, and it seems, but the paperwork. Imagine there's paperwork. If you say I'm calling up John Brooks from Hertha Berlin for the U23s against Colombia, Hertha Berlin could say, nah, we're good. We want him to stay here. But
right.
if you call him up for the senior squad, they have to release him per FIFA regulation. So if maybe Klinsmann's playing a bit of a game here, but maybe he can't do any better than this. But it still seems like a risky thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And you would think that this time around, although it's true that clubs don't have to release players if it's not a senior national team call-up, this time around, the U23s are actually playing on a FIFA date, so...
Yeah,
maybe Hertha would be a little more amenable.
But clubs have been obstinate before, so you never know. I mean, I'm not giving Klinsman a pass on this. And again, maybe ultimately it doesn't matter. And the other argument that I've heard, and I haven't seen this come out of Andy Herzog's mouth. I'd love to know his thoughts. But the other argument I've heard is, well, this U23 has some camaraderie and some chemistry. This U23 team, and maybe you don't change that by throwing in players who are certainly established senior level guys like Yedlin and Brooks, and maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that, but especially with the injury to Cameron Carter-Vickers, Carter-Vickers and Matt Miazga were that team's first choice center back pairing for the Olympic qualifying tournament. So, I mean, what chemistry do Tim Parker and Matt Miazga have? Probably not much more than John Brooks and Matt Miazga would have. But John Brooks, you have a guy who's playing at a really high level right now. So it would seem for the U23's chances of making the Olympics that having him with the team would be pretty beneficial.
Okay, let's just talk about this U23 challenge and consider what represents. I mean, the best case scenario is you score a couple goals, you come home ahead. I think most of us, I think all of us imagine that to be nearly impossible. But they're probably good enough, and if a couple of breaks go their way, to get something that's approaching a manageable scoreline coming back home. What would that be? I mean, is a 2-1 loss okay for Andy Herzog?
Yeah, I think they would take a 2-1 because away goals are in play. Certainly, they're going to set up defensively. They're going to try to shield that back line, especially given the aforementioned injury to Carter-Vickers. But yeah, I mean, if they can get an away goal, that would be huge, obviously, with the away goal rule in effect. But I think that, they're going to want to not be down more than one goal heading back to Frisco. This Colombia team, they're strong, but, not as strong as some of the top teams in South America at this age group. There's a reason they're in this playoff along with the U.S. But certainly, I would say Colombia is probably a better team than the U.S. So going down to Colombia and getting a draw would be optimal, but even a 2-1 loss would be acceptable heading back to Texas next week.
Well, let's consider what Herzog does with his lineup. I saw a proposed lineup this morning. I mean, I hadn't really gone through it myself, but this makes some sense with Fatai and Lashe and Will Trapp in the middle of center midfield. That's not that Will Trapp's a defensive midfielder necessarily. He's a holding mid. He's a possession guy. He's a good passer of the ball, but he's not going to get forward. So that is a bucket. Do you imagine that's what we're going to see?
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I think that is the U.S.'s best hope to try to keep the score down, to try to maintain some kind of defensive solidity, is starting a couple more defensive guys. And Alashe, you have a guy who covers a lot of ground and wins a lot of tackles. And then with Trapp, you have a guy who's really good in distribution, who, when the U.S. wins the ball back, is able to start attacks and try to find guys like a Jordan Morris or like a Keith Sweater who has some speed, who can try to get behind the Columbia back line and try to score some goals via counterattack.
I would imagine. I mean, my guess would be a lone striker, Jordan Morris up top, maybe Keith Sweater on one of the flanks, or on the right flank most likely. But who do you imagine that Herzog's going to lean on here? Because this lineup doesn't have Luis Gil in it. I'm not sure he's a starter necessarily, but you imagine he could add something on the attacking end.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think that Morris is going to be up top alone, and then Keith Sweater is going to be out wide. And this team has relied on those two primarily for a lot of its offense. Another guy who you could see involved is Julian Green, perpetually waiting to break through with the first team at Bayern Munich. Probably never going to happen, but he's had a decent season for the reserves again. Another guy who could factor in the attack is Paul Arriola, who's doing fairly well at Club Tijuana, getting some first team minutes. But yeah, like I said, a lot of what the U.S. has done in an attacking sense has gone through Morris and Kiesweather, and so I wouldn't expect that to change much tonight.
All right, so the United States, again, in Barranquilla against Colombia tonight with a difficult challenge, but a little bit of hope there. We'll see what happens with them this afternoon as they will be coming back with some sort of scoreline that they'll have to deal with in Frisco. The other story that has dominated the discussion recently, Seth, is the story of Christian Pulisic and what team he was being called into and whether or not he's going to join now it's the senior team. We've been confirmed that there's a senior team call-up, perhaps for the game in Columbus, although he's got to get better, so he's at home in Pennsylvania. He's 17 years old, Seth, and I'm coming around to the idea that if you're good enough, it doesn't matter how old you are. But, there's got to at least be some hesitation on the part of Klinsmann and U.S. Soccer, especially in light of the Julian Green situation 2 years ago, about calling in Christian Pulisic.
Yeah, I think so, but I think more than that, what the U.S. Federation is doing with this call-up, first of all, they're showing Pulisic that they feel that he's a vital part of their future. You're talking about a guy who is still eligible for Croatia. From all indications, that's not a huge concern for the U.S., but anytime there's the danger of losing such a good prospect, it makes you a little bit more willing to call somebody up for the full national team at age 17. And I think that this call-up also, more than bringing him in for the purposes of playing him in these games, I think Klinsmann wants to see him at this level in training, see how he responds to being at a higher level with his teammates, see how he gets acclimated to the U.S. setup, and just start getting a chance to evaluate him in person, which he hasn't really had much of a chance to do. So certainly there's a little bit of concern about calling somebody up so young, but clearly, if he's at the level where he's able to get minutes for a team like Borussia Dortmund, who's one of the best 10 clubs teams in the world at age 17, he's probably good enough to play at the senior national team level.
I certainly think that every kid is different, every player is different, and I got into this discussion in light of Alejandro Bedoya making some comments about the hype that we put on these kids, Seth. That the argument is that we shouldn't put too much on these kids. We shouldn't hype them up. It's going to causes problems. Maybe it impacts their development. But I could certainly sit here and say, well, wait a second. Why not? Why is it not true that if this kid was of the right mentality and was made to be a star, that they wouldn't be able to navigate this? Maybe Christian Pulisic is that kid. I don't know. I think we are putting a responsibility on a fan base who can't expect to be rational when the responsibility should be on the kid and the people around him.
I totally agree with you, Jason. I mean, when you look at the best 10 or 15 soccer players in the world right now, all of those guys started out as highly touted youth prospects, and some people are able to handle it and some people aren't. But when you're at a certain talent level, that's just going to come with the territory. I mean, Wayne Rooney scored a goal for Everton at age 16, and the hype machine went into overdrive, and it didn't really seem to affect him negatively at all. So especially with a guy like Christian Pulisic, there's a lot of hype coming from the U.S., but he's in Germany. He's with Borussia Dortmund, so I don't know how much of it he even hears, and if he does hear it, how it really affects him. He seems to be a pretty confident kid. To get to the level where he's at such a young age, you have to have confidence. And so I don't think that we should really be concerned about talking up a player like Pulisic. I mean, U.S. fans should be excited about this kid. He's gotten to a level that very few Americans have gone to at any stage in their career, let alone at age 17. So it's a situation where I think that if a player's good enough and he has the right mentality to become a world-class player, then he can certainly handle the hype.
Yeah, you know what? It's in the case of this kid, it's a matter of he actually has not accomplished anything. Don't be wrong; he's played 4 times for Dortmund, but he's played 4 times for Dortmund at 17. Sometimes the kids that we get too excited about, if you want to put that label on it, are kids who haven't done anything on the senior level. They've been in a youth team here or there. They've done very well for the U20s at some club or something. And that I sort of get. It's a little bit easier to argue that maybe we don't get excited about a player who has yet to even become a full professional.
Yeah, and the model that everybody uses is Freddie Adu as sort of the cautionary tale. But the thing about Freddie Adu that you have to remember is this is an unprecedented situation that is never going to happen again. When you're talking about someone who's 14 years old and the highest paid player in MLS and in his own Sierra Mist commercial with Pele, that's never going to happen again. So I think to compare every hyped U.S. prospect to Freddie Adu is a little disingenuous.
Yeah, I'm with you, Seth. By the way, if Christian Pulisic makes his debut for the U.S. men's national team on Tuesday against Guatemala in Columbus, which right now is not a given considering his health, but he is being called. If he does get capped, and we haven't touched on the whole whether or not cap tying him is important. I don't really think it is, but fine. He still cannot be the youngest player to ever play for the U.S. men's national team. That will still be Freddie Adu, 16 years of age when he made his debut. 16 years and 234 days in 2006. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, Seth Vertelny.
Almost a full year younger than
almost. Yeah, I mean, hell, Pulisic is an old man at this point. Seth Vertelny from Goal.com with us on Soccer Morning. Seth, appreciate the time and enjoy the matches. Let's keep the Twitter snark to a minimum on. No, wait, that's not going to happen, is it?
No guarantees on that one.
All right, thanks a lot, Seth. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
There goes Seth Vertelny. When we come back, our friend Dwayne Rollins from Canadian Soccer News, he is at 24th Minute on Twitter. He'll tell us about whether or not Canada can get something out of their home match tonight, qualifier against the Mexicans. Soccer Morning, backheel.com.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, so we are back on Soccer Morning. It's Friday. It's International Break Weekend, whatever you want to call that. International stuff. It's a FIFA day. Games across the world related to World Cup qualifying for 2018, including in Canada, where the Canadian national team will take on Mexico in the first of a two-game set in Vancouver. Dwayne Rollins, 24th minute, Canadian Soccer News, joins us on the line. Hi, Dwayne. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jason.
Tripping over myself here. All right, so let's just cut through all of the stuff. Dwayne, what are the chances Canada beats Mexico tonight?
Oh, beats, you said. Get the full 3 points. I hate to put numbers on it, but Canada's inability to score has been troublesome over the last 18 months or so. Added a couple pieces in the last little while. Looked a little bit better, but it's Mexico they're playing. I would put it maybe at 25%, which might be a little higher than some people think. I think there's a much better chance they might get a draw, though.
Okay, well, that's going to take us to the draw then. What are the percent chance that Canada can actually pull out a point from this game against Mexico?
The one thing Canada has done well going all the way back to before the Gold Cup and through the Gold Cup, where people forget as much as they didn't look very good, they only allowed the one goal during the 3 games, is defend. Combine that with the fact that Mexico's playing on turf, that it's going to be open air and not really comfortable for a lot of these guys, for the Mexicans. I think that there is a fairly good chance that Canada could grind out a 0-0 or maybe nick a 1-1 tonight. So I would put that at maybe 50%, we'll say, which for Canada and Mexico, I think me giving it 50% is pretty optimistic.
Well, I think that's a big step if that's true, and I know it's a subjective analysis on your part, and I imagine maybe just a tiny little bias mixed in there, but certainly no reason not to be positive about the program right now. We're not talking about Canada becoming CONCACAF elite yet, Dwayne, but we are seeing something approaching actual steps forward.
Yeah, what the goal heading into this cycle was really to not embarrass ourselves, to be blunt. When you think about how the last cycle ended, when you think about the amount of turnover that was there, the year following that 8-1 loss in Honduras, where they didn't score a goal for more than a year, looked horrible in doing so. We're working so many different players through the program, just we're floundering. But something's changed since then, and now that goal has shifted to the possibility that there are many people up here that think that they can get to the Hex. Once they get to the Hex, all bets are off, but that would be the goal, to get through this round of qualifying. You look at Honduras, you look at El Salvador in this group as well. They're not exactly at the top of their game. Canada has started the cycle well with the 4 points in the first 2 games of this. If they can get anything out of these two, and especially if Honduras and El Salvador trip each other up, then Canada is going to go into those final 2 games on a good stand, and we'll be looking to get to the Hex. And then, as I said, all bets would be off that. That's the goal, though. You talk about CONCACAF elite, one step at a time. Just get to the final round.
Right. Okay. So after the first 2 matches, Canada coming out with the 4 points against El Salvador. Right. That was the first set of games.
So they split it to El Salvador and Honduras. They got the win 1-0 against Honduras.
Right. Well, I forgot. Okay, so my brain has been fried by the fact that for some reason CONCACAF has scheduled these back-to-back against the same team situations for everybody. All right, so yeah, El Salvador and Honduras. So what do you? I mean, this isn't again for Canada. This isn't just about what happens tonight. Although you would love to be able to control your own destiny here, it's also what happens in the other game. What are you looking? I mean, I suppose that 2 draws out of El Salvador and Honduras is exactly what Canada needs.
Yeah, we've coined a term. We coined a term. We're calling it the double-double after our famous Tim Hortons coffee up here. We want the 2 points dropped in 2 games for those 2 teams. So that's what everyone's cheering for. But realistically, I think that a split of 3 points each, so any combination which doesn't have one of those teams getting all the points, I think would suit Canada just fine. They have El Salvador at home in the final 2 legs, and they're down to the place of the famous loss to end out this qualifying, which I think is good. It gives them a chance to have a cathartic ending with that, and maybe change things a little bit around and change the narrative up here. Because even in the preview of this game, that 8-1, it looms large. Everyone still talks about it. All the news programs start with the highlights from that game. I call them highlights very loosely from a Canadian perspective, but yeah, there are opportunities for these guys now to really change the narrative of how Canadians view this team based on the way they've been playing so far.
All right, so this game at home, 50+ thousand people at BC Place from what I read. I imagine there's going to be a very strong Mexican contingent, but this is going to be a pro-Canada crowd, I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about that. But it's at least at home. As you said, it's on turf. It's not going to be the greatest environmental circumstances for a Mexican domination. How much does Bonito Floro go for it here? And when I say go for it, obviously that's relative. You're still going to play a defensive setup for the most part, versus what's happening on Tuesday. I mean, literally, he can just blow the doors off of the effort in this game and say, no matter what happens, we got to get a point here. Let's worry about Tuesday later.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with it. They will open it up in so much as they can. And what that means is they will probably start Scott Arfield, which is the new, he's Scottish, but he's decided because his father was born in Toronto that he's going to represent Canada. It's his first appearance for Canada. He plays for Burnley, has played in the Premier League. So a high-quality player that, for a Canadian program, from a Canadian perspective, has come into the program, going to play out in the wings, along with Junior Roulette on the other wing, likely tonight. Those two will be set up purely to counter. Will Johnson will probably have a little bit more freedom to get up in there and support the attack on the counter, but they primarily will be looking to look for one or two opportunities to unleash those wing players, create some space, and perhaps get Kyle Lauren isolated up top alone to maybe tap something in as he's been doing in MLS right now. That's kind of the goal. But all that is said, they'll be happy with 0-0, and I think that they primarily will go into this game, trying to keep that 0 on the Mexico side, and if anything happens on their own, then that's a bonus.
Okay, so I mean, again, we're talking about the progress here, and I think that for people who maybe don't have a full appreciation of the Canada roster at the moment, you mentioned Arfield. That's good information for those of us who were not aware of his connection and joining the team. A quality addition. We at least a lot of us were aware of the saga with Junior Roulette. He's decided to play for Canada. And then obviously Kyle Lauren is the star in waiting here, and he's already started off the MLS season very strongly, Dwayne. There's no reason to think we're looking at a sophomore slump. He's only 20 years old. He'll be 21 in a couple of weeks, but he's only 21 years old. How important, how big, how much can Canada really put on Kyle Lauren's shoulders at this point?
Well, that's the question. I've had the opportunity to speak to him several times now, and he is sincerely a mentally strong and humble kid that I think can handle the pressure. But you just said it. He's only 20. Yes, he's been scoring at MLS. MLS to international is a different jump. To expect him to come in and dominate and do things that he's been doing in MLS at the international level, especially against the likes of Mexico, might be a step too far to ask of him right now. That said, you can't understate how important he is to the program. The last time Canada had a player that sort of had the potential to score consistently professionally as Kyle Lauren and internationally as Kyle Lauren was probably going all the way back to Teal Bunbury's dad, Alex Bunbury, in the 90s. So it's been a long time since Canada had a player of that type of player that could do those type of things consistently like him. So he is absolutely vital to any chance Canada has to take that step and at least get competitive to get up to a hex. So you would hope that he would break through at some point. I don't know if tonight's going to be the night, but certainly he is vital to the future of this program. He's
again, a young player. He's been carrying the load for Orlando for a year now, and we'll see. I mean, again, answered the call. Not a lot of expectation, or at least high expectations because of his draft position, but not necessarily like you're going to walk into an MLS team and be expected to score 17 goals. Nobody had that on him. So he's obviously been a nice surprise for his MLS team. He did have the Gold Cup. He did have the miss, which apparently is, I thought that might really do some damage to him. I think that speaks to what you're saying about his attitude.
Yeah, everyone that talks to him says the same thing. He's almost cliche Canadian. The thank you and please and I'm humble kind of stuff like that. He's almost like that. And he's very soft spoken, as I said as well. He's incredibly driven, and he has a great support staff around him as well. He comes out of that Sigma FC program up here that a lot of players are coming out of lately. The academy program, private academy, just just west of Toronto, and the support system around that and the way that they still work with those athletes day in, day out. I know that the gentleman who runs that program is in almost, daily contact with Kyle still to this point. So just a lot of supports for him, and there's a lot of drive from him to get better every day. So he's the real deal. Kyle Lauren is going to be successful in his career. Whether or not that translates internationally will depend on a lot of how Canada supports him. Which is the question. And I think that if you look back to the Gold Cup and his inability to score there, and obviously the miss was unfortunate, but that happens to every striker in the world at one point in their career. You go back and find lots of world-class guys that have missed something similar. But, I think it stems down to the just complete and utter lack of support that he got in that Gold Cup was the rest of his lack of success. So, we'll see. Now that we've added Arfield and Ouellette have come into the program since that time, having those kind of width presence out there that have offensive abilities and can get up there and create space for him, I think is going to make a world of difference. He does have an international goal. It came against Dominica, so, he hasn't really scored against one of the big boys yet. So hopefully sometime in the next 4 games, that'll happen for him.
Mexico visiting Canada, BC Place, 10 o'clock kickoff or 10-ish kickoff Eastern time for that game. I'm not sure where it's might be on television in the United States. Of course, the United States will be playing at that exact time. So maybe you flip back and forth, or you just keep an eye on Twitter. I'm sure Dwayne will have I'm sure you're going to have some updates on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll probably be on Twitter. Daniel Squizzados, who's always another great follow for the Canadians.
There you go. Yeah, definitely follow Squiz as well. All right. While I have a couple of minutes here left before the top of the hour, Dwayne, 2 other topics I want to touch on. I'm going to go to the Canadian Premier League, the proposed Canadian National League. You and I have talked about this, I think, before. We had some sort of news leaks that were really the driver of interest in this thing. Where do things stand right now with the Canadian Premier League?
Yeah, it's gone radio silent again, and that's by design. They really are moving forward with this at this particular time. Although there are a lot of people that have skepticism around it, and I understand where that comes from, I think it's important to realize that the CSA has the financial backing behind this and is really committed to moving forward with it. When that announcement happens, it's only going to happen when they feel that they have all the ducks in a row and that they can answer all the questions that are going to be thrown at them and, at the potential launch press conference. And that may be in 2 weeks, and it may be in 10 months. They don't honestly know yet. And that's anyone I talk to has sort of said the same thing. They just continue to work to try and make sure that everything is, that they're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And that's just so vital to making sure that this works, because really you can't afford to have it. There's so much skepticism around it already. You can't afford any hiccup. You can't afford any sort of hesitation in answering a question when it comes to launch this league. It has to launch perfectly to have a chance.
All right, so the Canadian Premier League, obviously an intriguing possibility, but as you said, for the time being, keeping things under wraps. Well, what did you make of Bill Peterson's comments when asked about the potential for teams to leave his league and join up with the Canadian Premier League? What did you make of those comments?
I think that you have to take a grain of salt with everything the NASL says when it relates to Canada. They had an opportunity to be involved in this project at the very beginning and sort of dropped the ball. The original plan, the original thinking, one of the plans on the table anyway, was to have kind of create a northern division or a Canadian division of the NASL and sort of have some kind of integrated schedule and playoff and so on and so forth. They thought that might be a little bit safer, but after an initial meeting with the NASL just stopped communicating with them and started, pursuing other American markets and so on and so forth. And it's understandable. It's an American league. They want to expand their footprint there. But I think the CSA at that point kind of went, well, we're going to do our own thing. And what's important to understand, and I think that people forget this sometimes, is as much as Canadian teams play in American leagues, they ultimately are governed and sanctioned by the CSA. So if the CSA wants them to be playing in Canadian leagues, they do in fact have the power to make that happen. So I don't know how much control the NASL would have other than to allow these clubs like FC Edmonton and the Ottawa Fury to just fold would be the only option that they have to refuse to let them go in or refuse to cooperate with the CSA. But I don't know how that benefits those clubs in the end if the CSA really pushes the agenda that they want them playing at home. I mean, we've already seen it at lower levels. There were a couple women's teams that were trying to get into that new second-tier women's league, and the CSA just put their foot down and said no, and those teams aren't playing this year. So ultimately, I think that you have to understand that the governing body does need to sanction these teams at every level, no matter how professional they may be on the outside.
All right, the other story that's come up is in your backyard there, TFC. Hercules Gomez waived by Toronto FC after a handful of appearances in 2015. He's moved on now and signed with the Seattle Sounders after a trial, and because he's Hercules Gomez, he has been candid and open with his feelings about the departure from Toronto, and he's taken some, I mean, I don't want to call them shots, because if that's how he was treated, then ultimately it's just him telling a story about his time there, but he definitely seems to be upset about the way things went in Toronto.
Yeah, and look, if this was an isolated situation in TFC's history, then I don't think people would be too concerned about a player that had been waived, sort of saying that he was frustrated with the club that had waived him. That seems like a pretty normal story, right? However, there is a lot of history of TFC not treating people well when they release them, and that's kind of what he was implying, is that he wasn't communicated to, that he maybe was told one thing and then something else happened, perhaps, all sort of things like that. And I'll say this: there was a lot of confusion around signing Gomez last year. He seemed like an expensive addition, not where this team needed. And when we came into the preseason of this year, he was still around. And since I think a lot of people, including Herculez Gomez, I suspect, figured that since he wasn't released in the offseason, wasn't provided with an opportunity to find a new club, in that January window, that TFC planned to keep him around for the year. So then to release him on the eve of the season, outside of the time when he normally could have found another team, you can understand his frustration there. But really, as I said, the biggest problem around this is whether this speaks to TFC not getting past some of its battled habits, which they're seen as a cold team by players, that they kind of go about things in a very business-like manner that doesn't necessarily take in the personal, the human aspect of the game, and that's bit them in the butt before and caused players to badmouth the organization when they've left before. It's not the first time we've heard this. It's been the first time in a while, though, and the first time with the new management, the Bezbachenko, Vanny kind of management, that we've heard it. So that's where a lot of concern in Toronto is coming from. But in fairness to TFC, we haven't heard their side of the story. We've only heard Herc, and I love Herc. We all love Herc. We do. He's a great guy. He'll talk to you on Twitter. He'll say anything. He'll be a candidate. He's going to be a great addition on TV one day somewhere. But there's always two sides to a story.
Absolutely. So we I don't imagine that TFC. I don't think it's in their interest to say anything, though. Is it?
No, not really, unless it were to continue. And I think that we should also note that within Herc, even when Hercule was kind of bashing the TFC, he did say, they're good people, though. So it wasn't exactly like he was throwing everyone under the bus completely. And I doubt we'll hear him say this again. I suspect he was asked directly, and he answered the question as he ought to do. And unless someone asks him directly again, and TFC has a lot of media presence, so someone might. But other than that, I can't really see him, belaboring this too much moving forward. So I doubt we'll hear anything from TFC, and fans will get over it because they always do.
Absolutely. All right. So to wrap up here, since we're in this place, and yeah, they don't play this weekend, and that's a good thing with international call-ups. How do fans feel? How do you feel about the where TFC sits after 3 games? Again, 8-game road trip to start the season with BMO Field getting upgraded.
Yeah, it's surprising. I think that with the Kansas City game, despite the fact that they lost that game controversially with the call at the end, the non-call at the end, but despite that, I think a lot of fans here left that feeling a little bit better about the team than they did even after the 2 results in the first 2 weeks, because of the way that they defensively were solid throughout, even though Drew Moore was missing for the game. And that's been the biggest difference between TFC in the first 3 games and TFC last year, is that they've looked defensively competent. They've only allowed 3 goals in 3 games. For that club, that's incredible. They had the worst defensive record in the league last year, and if they can continue that, the thinking is that they'll start to play a little bit more forward thinking when they get back at home, and when they get Josie Altidore fully healthy. He's missed all but a few minutes and a few ineffective minutes in the first 3 weeks. So once that happens, the feeling is here they'll start to score a little bit closer to what they did last year, and if they can stay as defensively solid as they've been in the first 3 games, then there is a cautious optimism around this club right now. It's always going to be cautious optimism in Toronto because, it's the 10th season and there's a lot of evidence that TFC will find a way to screw it all up in the end. But the fans, I think, are, as I said, cautiously optimistic right now.
There you go. Dwayne Rollins, 24th minute on Twitter. That's 24THMINU. And how do you spell minute? Never mind. You know how to spell minute. Also, Canadian Soccer News, host of a couple of different podcasts, including the Two Solitudes. which is at what's the website again, Dwayne? My apologies.
The Sports Podcasting Network.
There you go, the Sports Podcasting Network.com. Dwayne, Kevin Laramie, a bunch of excellent stuff happening over there. Thank you very much for the time, Dwayne. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Jason.
Best of luck to your boys tonight as they take on the dreaded Mexicans in World Cup qualifying. Let's take a break. When we come back, the phone lines will be open here on a Friday, and we'll get your chance to get on the air to wrap up this week. It's been one of those weeks. Let's do this. SoccerMorningBackyard.com.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, back on Soccer Morning on a Friday. Phone lines are open 646-832-3909. I really wish the phone number spelled something cool. Can we figure it? Are we close at all? If you look at your phone and you look at the number pad, does it spell like 646-832-KICK? No, it doesn't spell that at all. Don't type that into your phone. You won't call me. You'll call somebody else. Wait, good stuff from Seth Bertalny. Good stuff from Dwayne Rollins. Let's see. Looking at the Twitter machine, Robert in Southern California is tweeting me a couple of different things. Robert, stay on topic. I did read Omar Gonzalez's comments on if he wanted to stay with the Galaxy, he had to take a 75% pay cut. Look, the Galaxy were in a difficult salary cap situation. I don't think they intended to insult Omar Gonzalez. They obviously had a budget issue coming into 2016 based on the decisions that they made, and they decided that Omar Gonzalez is a player that probably needed to move on. I guess they offered him a contract, or they said, hey, here's what we can pay you. And he said, wait a second, hold on, I'm not. But then again, he was making a lot of money. It's not quite the Jermaine Jones situation, but when you consider the value, Omar Gonzalez still in his prime. He should be, I don't know that he should be offended, because in MLS, it's as much about managing that cap as it is about how much you value the player. These two things go. Anyway, what's my favorite Johan Cruyff quote? Come on. There's a lot of good soccer quotes in there. The one I like is the one I'm most fond of, because it is the snarkiest, it is the funniest, is one he said, if I wanted you to understand it, I would have explained it better. If he said that is fantastic stuff. Very good from Johan Cruyff. Let's go down to Alabama. Talk to Daniel. Hey, Daniel.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's the weekend.
Yeah, it was an exciting day. We got 2 national team games going on this evening. Catch the boys early and then the men late at night. I think that I think that Klinsmann actually has a real opportunity here with Fabian Johnson being out. The fact that he's talked about this attacking, take it to the other team brand of soccer that we've been waiting on for the past 5 years. But he's experimented a lot with the diamond, and I think that, like, ideally tonight, if we could see Bradley in a deep lying role, and then we have Nagbe and Bedoya, who have the experience both out wide and in the middle, being these hybrid wide central midfielders, where they could be the shuttlers in a 4-4-2 diamond, like a narrow diamond, with Lee Wynn up at the top at the point, and Dempsey and Bobby Wood in front of them. So I think that if we came out with a lineup, it's not something that I expect to see.
Wait, hold on. Where's the width? Where's the width, Daniel? You're just gonna ignore the width? I mean, because again, the problem I have with the biggest problem I have with this roster, and I'm not saying there are a lot of good fullback options, but you do have Breck Shea that you were grooming at left back. There are, DeAndre Yedlin can play right back. Maybe if he does, that makes a difference. But I don't know.
The width would absolutely have to come for Edgar Castillo out left and Yedlin out right, coming up from the fullbacks. I mean, I would assume that would be a given in the lineup. Of course, nothing's a given with Klinsmann.
No, nothing's given. That's the problem.
They're the only 2 fullbacks we've called up. I mean, I could beat a dead horse all day about the fact that we have 7 center backs and 2 fullbacks. I would like to give the benefit of the doubt to the fullbacks and actually get them to start at fullback. But
yeah,
that's not always the case.
Well, I mean, he's messed about with his lineups so often, his formations so often that I kind. It's not. There's one part of me that wants him to stick with something because I feel as though continuity matters. There's another part of me that says, well, maybe it doesn't matter. Adjust to what your personnel is. But then I get back to the question of whether or not he's calling in the right personnel sometimes.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree there. I mean, you've got, especially in the left back situation, you call it up Castillo, which is, Edgar's been playing well down at Monterey, so I think he's doing a good job. But then you got, you've got Jonathan Bornstein, who's been playing well in the Mexican League, and we've tried some Greg Garza, we've tried some Breck Shea. We haven't given Robbie Rogers a look, but there are left backs out there that, they might not be world class guys, but I still think that that's a better option than
Trevor's telling me that Alvarado has played at left back fairly often. First of all, I'm not sold on Alvarado as a player, period, much less where his position is. But and I don't know this. Are they playing a 4-man back line at Club America these days? Because last time I remember paying attention to what Alvarado was doing, because again, not sold on him as a player, and maybe this is wrong of me. He was playing as part of a 3-man back line. And I don't know that's not something Klinsmann's going to do. I mean, I actually presented that to somebody this week. I said, what if he plays a 3-man back line? And they went, what are you talking about? So who knows?
Well, the most recent thing that I've seen Alvarado do is play as an overage player for Club America's U20 team.
That's a shot.
which is a whole different can of worms in and of itself. But and it's funny that the MLS Soccer, their Twitter feed, they posted a poll last night after Klinsmann's comments of, well, we have Edgar Castillo to play left back and Orozco and Alvarado are also options. They put up a poll, and to no one's surprise, in a landslide, Edgar Castillo got the vote because he's the one of the 3 that regularly plays left back.
Yeah. Okay.
And then. I don't think we're likely to see that diamond, but it'd be something that I think could be a good experimental thing, especially when you're playing a team like Guatemala, where even though you're playing on the road at Guatemala, I don't expect them to be very proactive in their attack. I mean, I think they're going to bunker and counter like they did 4 years ago. And that game, your first guest was talking about that game being close with the 1-1 with Marco Papa hitting a brilliant free kick late in the game. That, if I remember right, that game was in a monsoon though. Like the ball was like, people were hoofing it up the field and the ball would just stop in a big puddle of water. It wasn't great conditions. And I don't think anything like that's supposed to happen tonight.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to add is talking about the U23s. We talked about the John Brooks, DeAndre Yedlin thing about whether they should be with the U23s and give Herzog his best team, or whether they should be with the national team as this full team as a first choice options. I think another interesting dilemma that's going to come up if we were to upset Colombia, assuming that lightning strikes and we are able to upset Colombia and make it to the Olympics, you've got the same dilemma again as to whether Brooks and Yedlin play in the Olympics or whether they play in the Copa America. I mean, those tournaments don't take place at the same time, but yeah,
you can't do both. No, it's too much. Yeah, right. It's too much. I mean, it's ongoing daily discussion about whether or not Messi is going to play in one or the other. Neymar wants to play in both, but that's too much, and blah blah. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, we've got our own little limit there. Not Brooks and Yedlin would be confused with Messi and Neymar.
Well, no, but I mean, the point is that coming out of a long European season. For a guy like John Brooks to go into Copa America, then go to the Olympics, then go back to Hertha Berlin, and that's just I don't care if he's 22 or 42, it's too much. Right,
and our U23s, I mean they have their strengths are almost definitely our defenders and our central midfield being more defensive oriented with Alashe and Trapp, and then we have tons of speed with Morris, Kai Sweater, Shelton, Paul Areola, Julian Green. But it's just more of the same, really. It's like, well, what are our strengths? Well, we have good central defensive midfielders, and we have lots of speed that lacks some technical ability and some professional polish. And it's like, well, is that what the U.S. has been for, the last 20 years? I mean, that's just what we do. And I don't really see much of that changing as far as, whether we're trying different formations. I mean, when you talked about earlier, the somebody posting that the best option would be the bucket. It's like, well, I thought we were getting away from the bucket. I thought we were trying to do this. I thought we were trying to do that. I'm just not seeing it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I'm all for us being the best team we can be with the players that we have, but it just seems to be more of the same and not a whole lot of change going on there.
We shall see what happens tonight in Guatemala City. Daniel, I appreciate the phone call. Thank you very much, man. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Jason. You too.
Daniel closes us out on a Friday, closes out our week. Thank you very much to Seth Vertelny and Dwayne Rollins for their contributions today. Good stuff from both of them. We will be back on Monday to obviously go over whatever happens tonight in CONCACAF qualifying for the United States, Canada, and other teams across the region, plus much more Combo Bowl qualifying. We can probably dive into that a little bit heavier next week. And then, we'll just have some soccer talk on a Monday. So be there for that, because now it is time for me to take my leave. Make sure you check out SiriusXM FC Channel 85 if you have a subscription. If you don't have a subscription, maybe consider it. Follow us on Twitter @SoccerMorning. And I'll talk to you on Monday. Bye.